So next we need to deal with Max Beckmann. Now, Beckmann initially rationalized the war. He was actually in favor of the war, and this sounds very odd in today's day and age. Who would be in favor of a war? But actually, most of the European peoples were in favor of World War I. In August, very early August, late July of 1914, there are huge demonstrations in favor of the war in Munich, Berlin, Paris, London, Moscow, and elsewhere. All over the continent, millions of people are saying they're going, this is fantastic. This is a great idea. Let's have some sport and shoot some enemy in the process. And they're all thinking this is going to take 6 weeks. So this is going to be great. It's going to get men to be men. It's very positive. But again, Beckmann will become disillusioned, just like all the other artists that we're looking at. Now, he says that he endures a great injury to his soul during World War I. Beckmann channeled his experience of modern life into expressive images that haunt the viewer with their intensity of emotion and symbolism. Despite his early leanings towards the academic and expressionism, he becomes one of the main artists of New Objectivity and created scathing visual critiques of the tumultuous interwar years. So he's not just critiquing the war, he's critiquing the society, because he blames the society. And we're going to see Dada do the same thing. They're going to blame the society for the war going on. After all, wars do not happen in a vacuum. They are not created entirely by the military. Other people must be in favor. Now, Beckmann is not looking at the trenches. He's not looking at the soldiers. Instead, he's looking at the home front, and he creates night. So he sees no purpose in the suffering he shows. There's no glory for anyone. There's no compensation, no gloating over justice. Only endless pain and cruelty. Cruelty for its own sake. And that's what we're seeing here in Night. Now, the first thing that should stand out is as you look at it, that background looks very fractured. The reason that the background looks quite fractured is it is meant to be a traumatic experience. Now, think back, because most of us at some point have been through a traumatic experience. It could be a car accident, a fight, any number of different things that could have happened. And when you think of that traumatic experience, generally we don't think of it in a single linear progression. We don't think of it like a story or a narrative. Instead, we usually see bits and pieces that we're trying to sew together into a larger narrative, but our brain just doesn't like it. When we go through trauma, our brain does this intentionally. It fractures the experience. And that's what we're seeing here. As you look at the image, seems quite fractured, just like any trauma would be. Now here, Beckmann blames human nature, and there seems to be no physical escape from the overwhelming self-accusation. Victims and aggressors alike are all cornered. There's no exit. There's nothing that can be done. And he's abandoned the Christian symbolism he used prior. Here, there is no salvation. One may consider the tiny window cross in the darkness outside as a symbol of hope, but otherwise, the pressure in the tight little torture chamber is without relief. And what you're referring to here is right here, there's a little cross from the reflection of a window. That could give us that idea of potential redemption. But if you recognize what's going on, you're actually seeing the reflections in the cross becomes a void, as if we're being told that the cross, Christianity, those sort of morals, ethics, and ideas are particularly absent here. The violence and wretched brutality invade the house and comment on social condition. So let's talk about what's going on. So, as we look at the piece, let's start with the male, and we'll kind of move around the room. The male is being tortured or sort of hung by a brutish man in the background, while this man in a vest seems to be examining him. The man in the vest with the pipe is representative of a military doctor, just like we saw in Gross, the kind of person who says, yep, he's fit for active service. As we look at this man, and we can assume that he was a soldier because most of the German male population between the age of 18 and 65 will be, he has this problem with his foot. His foot is black. That is trench foot. That means his foot is literally rotting off of his body because it was kept damp for months at a time. It still happens today with people in the jungle, that sort of thing. It takes a lot of care, but they aren't using that care here. Close to him, we also see this odd woman in red. We've got the red hair, we've got the red dress. We know red represents prostitution. Why is she there? Because that prostitution is damaging families. Here's what's happening. When you go to the trenches, you want to go home. You don't really care how. And one of the fastest ways to get home on the Allied side as well as the Central Powers is to catch an STD, because they'll immediately send you home for 4 to 6 weeks to get that cured, and then you can come back. So what a lot of soldiers would do is they would find prostitutes who would hang signs telling them what STDs they have. They would go visit that prostitute, get the STD, and go home. But of course, what happens when they go home? That suddenly breaks up the family because the wife is sitting there going, wait a minute, hold the phone. You did what now? You see where that becomes a problem. It's starting to damage the home. And this painting is all about damaging the home. Then below we have a sound horn. So sort of the speaker to an old phonograph, speaking to the constant noise and insanity of the trenches, sort of getting at the psychiatric pain and damage that's been done to our soldier. Probably referring to shell shock. This idea that artillery shells can fall and kill you and leave the next man next to you perfectly fine. This sort of randomness of the shellings. As we move across, I'm going to move all the way over and then kind of move back towards center. Here we have our brutish man representing sort of war coming in. We can't tell what's going on with the woman under his arm, whether that's a prostitute. We see the red, so maybe she is a prostitute, but she seems to be associated with the war, possibly a prostitute following the troops. There's a lot of possible implications with her form. And then we have what we can assume is the mother right here, or wife, mother, whichever. Here's better placement for the arrow. And as we see her, she's trapped. And a lot of women felt this way, that they were completely trapped by the war. They are watching their children in many cases starve because of the British naval blockade. By 1916, 1917, you're choosing which child is going to get fed and which one is probably going to die in front of you. The candle behind her and the fact that she's not wearing pants, that maybe a couple of different things. Sexual violence, although that's not as big of an issue in World War I as we'll see post-World War II, but also the fact that many women will go out onto the black market to get things to feed their family, and they will prostitute themselves for a loaf of bread. This is Germany at the end of World War I. Things are really bad. You don't have a good comprehension of how bad it is. But to give you some idea, the average rations by the time we get to 1917 and 1918, you're talking between 400 and 600 calories a day for an adult, and roughly the same for a child. That's the equivalent of 2 Snickers bars. You can live on 2 Snickers bars for a while, but at some point, it's just not going to be enough, and you're going to need more. So they're not doing this because they dislike their husbands. They're doing this out of necessity. They have no other choice. So you get this identity that shifts and changes. They're doing things that they never thought they would have to do in order to maintain the house. This is basically the war. The larger idea of the painting is that the war has taken away privacy through depictions of rape and suffering in the once perceived safety of the home. The home is no longer safe. The domestic space is no longer safe. And we know this is a home from the interior space that Beckmann has given us. The objects seem dislocated and the space is buckled and illogical to get across the idea of a sudden trauma. And the angularity of the figures and rough surface contribute to this idea of savageness. There is no redeeming characteristic in this piece. And there isn't meant to be. This is meant to be horrific. This is the sort of thing that you're supposed to see in a museum in the 1920s or 30s and go, wow, the war was that bad. I don't ever want to think about going through that again. Beckmann's hope, is that the German people will do exactly that and not go to war again. Of course, that's not what happens, but that is his end goal.